Okay. Just so we don't waste too much time because we are on like the time crunch of 40 minutes. I think we can go into the sample essay portion now. So we are going to begin with a few sample essays that the Harvard Crimson posted. So the Harvard Crimson, if you weren't aware, is the newspaper on our campus. And I'll send the link to it in the chat, and then we can go directly into a couple of them. So I think structure-wise, we could go about having individuals read a bit about it, like we'll give people time to read like for a few minutes. And then once we've read over it for a few minutes, then we can move into our board Q&A first. No, I think we're gonna go over the essays and we're gonna go over the Q&A then. But I think, yeah. So I'll send in the chat for the link for Crimson essays, and then we can start off with. I'll send the link first, and we can pick a certain essay. So here is the link.
I just made you host so you can.
I can share screen as well if people aren't able to access. Do that really quickly. Okay, let me know if you're able to see. I think one essay that I liked on here that was able to like represent individuals like I guess inner pursuits, and then also like, being able to strongly show their qualities that make them a good Harvard applicant would be this one. I read one and I think it'd be a good one for us to go over. So I'd give like maybe about 5 minutes for everyone to read this. So at 23, so like 12:23 here, 8:23 Ethiopia, 9:23 West Coast. If everyone is done reading by then we can go a bit more into in depth why this essay was solid, and then board members and then just ESA members will go over and explain why we think that this essay is good. We'll do this for a few different essays, and then we can move into the Q&A portion after doing this for about 30 minutes or so. So yeah, make sure to read this for a bit, and then we'll rejoin in about 5 minutes or so. Is she okay? It's been 5 minutes, so I just not to take too much time, we can start going over this essay. So I'll start about why I think this essay was a good one, and I like the key things I think would be valuable for y'all to take from it. So topic wise, this was an essay about why a person wanted to be like nonconformist, and they went through a personal journey of initially being a nonconformist and then realizing that they didn't necessarily have to do that to be a different person. So I think structure wise, some of the best parts of this essay was how they opened up like with a sentence like this. Several years ago, my mother told me I listened to white people music. So a sentence like that, it like draws the attention of a reader. And you'll learn with the college application process that college application readers oftentimes when they read your essay, um, they give like a quick skim to begin with. And if you're able to like get their attention with an essay that has a sentence like that, something that draws the reader's attention, that's really valuable. I think me personally, one of the things I went for whenever I wrote my college essays was that I needed something that had like a very like strong beginning and then also had a strong end. And I think that this essay also had a very strong ending with like a last sentence like this that wasn't necessarily like a full sentence, and it said, and that's as punk as it gets, talking about like swapping out being a nonconformist to just being more of themselves. So, and that's as punk as it gets. I think that a sentence like that is able to, like they said specifically here, like a mic drop, like it ends the essay very well. It ends it like on a strong note. I think that's another thing that people can make sure to get into. um did anyone else from Harvard have any thoughts on this paper that they wanted to share?
I feel like on like in that third to last paragraph, or like the main one where it starts with what I think Lenin. No, you're right there. It's towards the bottom. Third to last. Yeah. That paragraph is very crucial. I would say like aim to have one or two of those where it's like a reflection type paragraph. Because you can explain a story, but if you don't like verbalize or like explicitly state what you learned from that moment, then they can't assume that you grew. And um, it could be like a few sentences, but that's the difference between a good and a great essay.
Um, I agree with you, Salome. And I think there's often a misconception that you have to write about something extremely just noteworthy and rare and, special. But really what matters is why it's special to you. So she took like a very ordinary object and made it like she redefined it as something very important to her. And I think that's a really successful strategy. Like I wrote about literally Barnes and Noble, the bookstore, and just redefined it in terms of like the legacy of education in my family and why my dad took me to Barnes and Noble. And yeah, I think that's a good strategy.
I think something that I really liked about the essay was how personal it was. I think that when you're writing essay, like a tip that people gave me that was really helpful is like if somebody picked your essay, like if one of your friends like picked your essay up like off the hallway of your high school, like they should be able to look at it and know like whose essay it is. So I feel like it is really important to like incorporate like as much of your personality as possible. And yeah, like sort of like what Avi said as well, it doesn't have to be something that's like a really big deal or something that's, really depressing either. Like it can be something that you just enjoy. But I think this essay did a good job of not just being like, oh, like I like punk rock, but sort of showing the way that they change, the way that it affect them, and like showing the entire process.
Exactly. And I think just to add a spin, since most of us are Abasha or Eritrean or Ethiopian here, I know a lot of people that have done it on Ethiopian centric things. Like I wrote about the masob in like one of my essays, or I know someone who did like making injera and stuff. So things that are like out of what you would normally think of as topics can also be like something to show off like your personality and how you can contribute to not just Harvard's community, but like any college that you're applying to.
Just to add off of that, I think that's a really good strategy. And I did obviously talk about my Ethiopian heritage. Another thing though is make sure you tie it back to you, because I've seen essays where it's just sort of talking about their culture, talking about, something that they're a part of that's unique, but not necessarily what like why they're unique and what they took away from it. So always tie it back to you. Like Solomon was saying, there's a reflection paragraph at the end.
Does anyone have, before we go into like a Q&A of the questions that you submitted in your Google Forms, does anyone have any specific questions about this particular essay? Also, like most of us here speak Amharic, so if you're more like comfortable like talking in Amharic, then Amharic or you can also ask in English. All right. Do you want to just jump into, okay, we'll jump into Q&A then. All right, so two questions from the chat. The first question was, do you believe that starting to write essays today will be late? We want to stress that for most like applications, they're not due until the span of like January 1st to like January 5th or January 10th. So you still have like 3 weeks, and where there's a will, there's a way. And then suddenly, if you wanted to answer the question of like, I did not take the SAT, will it matter for acceptance to Harvard?
Okay, I would say if you can take it, you should try. But if you haven't taken a single one at this point, it's like a matter of like if it's worth it or not. I will say, since everything has gone, like I think optional for 3 years, right? It was like a short contract, but I don't know if they'll extend it. I definitely know people that didn't take it and got in. I took it and did turn it in, but there are people that either never took it or took it and just never submitted. If you think your GPA is a good reflection of your academic standing right now, then you just need to consider if your SAT would help it. If you already took the exam, if it adds to that or like contextualizes it. If you think it like looks worse than like your GPA, then don't submit it. And honestly, like it has very little weight nowadays because it's like a single exam versus your GPA that took you like 4 years to maintain. So I would say don't stress it. But if you are better at science, take the or try to take the ACT. Not everyone has access. And then the SATs for like more like humanities, literature inclined people usually. And then I also wanted to add for the essays, it's never too late. I know it's like, dang, you only have 3 weeks left, but if anything, now is like the time compared to like I will admit I have written some essays the day before, and it just doesn't turn out as like good compared to like the ones that you spend time looking at. Like you go like since you have time now, if you start right now or like tomorrow, you would have time to like go back, and you could always like submit or like send it to teachers or friends or mentors who could also look at it. So better to start now if you know you want it, but it's never too late.
That's a really great point. Another question from Norawi in the chat was, for these essays, don't you need to connect it to what you want to do in college? And I can start off and anyone can answer. I personally think while it is good to tie it to like what you want to do in the future, that doesn't necessarily always mean like your major. Like since majors change so quickly, I think it's more important to show like who you are and what as a person you want to contribute to society than for you to say, oh, I did this, so I want to be a mechanical engineer. So it's more about showing your personality, at least for me. Does anyone have anything else that they want to add to that question about whether or not yeah, go ahead.
I can touch on that as well. Like, I think other parts of your application are a great way to show what you want to do in your academic skill set, such as like extracurriculars or just the classes that you took. So the essays are, like Arshama said, like a great way to distinguish yourself as an individual, as a person, from other people that have similar interests and similar like academic strengths. That's the place where you can say like, this is me and this is how I would benefit Harvard's culture or any college like culture and community as a person and as an individual.
To add on to what Keely said, I think that it's really just all about balancing your application. So in my application, I know I had a lot of extracurriculars that like tied into what I wanted to do in the future. I wanted to major in computer science. So in my personal statement, I just decided to talk more about like my personal identity and like being Ethiopian, growing up here. And I feel like because there was that balance, because they were still able to see in my extracurriculars that I was interested in computer science, like it didn't harm me in any way.
Yeah, hopping off that, I also in my like personal statement, I didn't really say what my like academic interests were, but I also like signified like or indicated like what I wanted to get out of the school in general. So like what kind of clubs I wanted to join, like what kind of people I wanted to meet. And that was like another way of like expressing interest without saying like, oh, I think I want to study this.
And something that really helped me is I know some of you may be applying internationally, but even within the United States, like Harvard doesn't only look at like grades and like who was like the smartest academically, because like every school has a valedictorian. And if Harvard only cared about academics, then like they'd still have to have some way to figure out of the highest academic standing students who would actually contribute to Harvard's community. And so it's really reassuring to know that like not everyone here had like the best grades in their high school. I wasn't valedictorian, I mean, or anywhere close, and I'm here. So you shouldn't be discouraged if you feel like, or you shouldn't feel like your SAT scores or your GPA are the only way for you to get into high institutions like Harvard. Does anyone have anything to add before we go to the next question?
I will also say that with the interest part, you should try to put it, or you should try to be consistent in your interest. And like your essays should kind of tie like loosely in with the rest of your application, whether it's like your interview or your like extracurriculars list. And I know the application also looks different for every school. We don't really have like a why Harvard essay, but I think that would be like a great spot where you could like include what you plan to study, but don't just like list it out because they could already find that in your application in the forms. So personalize it.
Another question that we saw in the chat, I'm trying to find who asked it, was about financial aid and if things like SAT scores and GPAs mattered for Harvard. And something that's really important is Harvard does not give correct me if I'm wrong, but all of Harvard's like financial aid or scholarships are based on financial aid. So like a lot of people have this conception that like if you are the best, then you'll get like a full ride to like Ivy Leagues. And for the most, unless it's like outside scholarships that aren't related to Harvard as a school, Harvard gives money based on how much your family makes. So if your family doesn't make as much, then they don't have to pay as much for Harvard. But there are very, very limited like grade or scholarship based like scholarships for Harvard. Based scholarships for Harvard.
So like to hop in on that, like she said, like the scholarships that Harvard provides is like totally need-based, need blind. So like the applications are need blind, but financial aid is need based. And then there's no merit-based scholarships, meaning that no one like other schools in the country, like for example, Rice, they'll give you a scholarship based on your performance and your performance on like AP tests, your GPA, all of that. However, here at Harvard, they just give you financial aid based on your financial needs. So whatever you submit on your CSS profile and the other financial documents. So don't necessarily stress about like if you come from a family that doesn't necessarily have like the finances to be able to pay for Harvard, if you submit the documents, then Harvard will provide you like a very generous financial package. Like for context, I like my family, we don't make like, I guess I have like a near like full scholarship here just off financial aid, like need-based financial aid. And they give it to, I forget what the percentage is, but I think that as of now, if your family makes less than 70,000, then like your family household makes less than $70,000, then they give full financial aid. Correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, but I think that's what it is. So yeah, they give very generous financial aid packages. And yeah, just to clarify, your SAT score, your ACT score won't determine how much financial aid you receive from Harvard.
Also to add, it's I think your family is expected to contribute 10% of their income regardless. And so that's typically how they determine what your aid package is, but you're also able to appeal if you're dissatisfied with your aid. There's like no promise that it'll be effective. Like don't have to say yes or anything like that. But if you do think that your aid package could be better, you're able to submit additional documents to them or flesh out your reasoning in a letter and send that to the financial aid office. And so I would say, like, not to necessarily stress, they're also able to match the financial aid that other private universities give you. And so if you get into Princeton, which has, historically very generous financial aid, or some other universities that just so happen to give you more money than Harvard will like achieve parity there and make sure that they compensate you with the same amount. And then the last thing on the financial aid point is also that be mindful of what other scholarships you get. You're still able to apply the National Merit Scholarships and other kind of more performance-based ones. At the same time, though, if it goes over a certain amount, so if you get more than $3,500 in scholarships from other sources, they will start whittling down your financial aid. So be really cognizant of that when you're submitting the information about like expected scholarships that you hope to receive, just because they will look at that when they're also making the calculation as well.
I will also say you could always make money once you get on campus when it comes to work study, or finding like paid positions, whether it's research or just like jobs around campus. But yeah, usually we find like students are able to find a way to make it work. We're lucky to have an institution that is pretty flexible.
And I'll also say you can apply to scholarships from, any institution. And like if you look on like scholarships.com and that kind of thing, you can find so many scholarships to apply to. So those like not only count for like honors and awards, but they also count for like the institution. I mean, they'll cover your institutional costs. So
Yeah, and I just want to, in a lot of like seniors that I've talked to, especially Avishai's, I think there's this misconception that a lot of like private schools are just like automatically more expensive than whatever public school system there is in your area. For example, I'm from California, so the University of California UC system. I, at least personally, I've gotten more financial aid from any of the private schools that I've applied to than any of the public schools that I've applied to, just because a lot of private institutions have more money to give out. So finances should not at all be a point of like, especially if you're low income, finances should not deter you from applying to like private institutions or private colleges, because most of the time they're very generous and have a lot of money that they're willing to give. And then I'm going through the responses. Oh yeah, that's for I'm not international. So another question is, Nati, do you want to pull from the list of questions you sent me? Because I lost it.
Yeah, no, let me look at it. So
There's one that's asking if you were invited for an interview, or if you don't get invited, if it's a bad thing. At least for Harvard, it's fully availability based, especially if you're abroad. Like they understand it's supposed to be like the alums that are closest to you. You could always reach out to the admissions office and possibly email them, as like Zoom tends to be like facilitated more, or like an option nowadays. But usually it's just a first come first serve, or if they are able to, they are, so it shouldn't be really a bad status on you. I will say though that like pretty much everyone on campus has had an interview, so you could take it as you will, but like try to reach out to them if you haven't been offered one, and offer like taking one through Zoom, because they learn a lot like about you through that, and like for me personally, I got to see my application. You get to see it once you come if you request it. And like my interview helped my application a lot.
I could speak to this. So for most undergraduate institutes, it's not more so like if they read your application, they like it, they offer you an interview, but it's more of is there an alumni willing to do an interview around you? So I'm from like the middle of nowhere, Illinois. There's not like a lot of like Ivy League alumni in my like town area. So a lot of times like I would get into a school, but I would never interview, mostly because like there's nobody to interview me for like a 3-hour radius. So if you haven't got one, I would not put like too much into it. You can always like reach out, like Salome said, and ask to do a Zoom interview now. But I wouldn't like lose sleep over not getting one to a school.
Okay, I think I'm.
No.
Someone has. Hannah.
Sorry, I just wanted to quickly address some of the questions in the chat where it's like asking if you need a certain GPA or if you need a certain SAT score. And I just think it's important to remember that like Harvard looks at your application with a holistic approach. So they're looking at everything and how everything ties in together. It's really hard to say that like GPA matters more than an essay or that this SAT score will get you in and this one won't, because it really just depends on how your application comes together. And like somebody messaged me about like my particular extracurriculars, and it's just really like important to not compare yourself to like what other people are doing or try to do what other people did to get into Harvard, because it's like they kind of want to see you kind of do your own thing, and it's really just about how you craft your application and put it all together. I don't know if anybody else wants to add on to that, but
Yeah, go for it. I was gonna say they also don't just look at the number. They look at like your transcript and how well you did in your classes, and they also look at like, are you improving throughout your 4 years in high school? So if you start out like really bad at math, like you got a B or like maybe even like a C in your math class freshman year, if they see you're improving from freshman year to all the way to your senior year, they'll like note that they want to see like an upward trajectory. So like I wouldn't sweat too much like if you don't have like the best grades, but if you can like craft a story and like show like which ones you're strong at, or like you're trying to improve and you can grow from it, they'll look really well onto that.
They also look at the classes that you took in terms of like, oh, are they selecting classes that they're interested in or like similar to their major, or like if you know you're really into engineering and you selectively like push yourself further in that direction, they'll take that into account as well. And like if you are pre-med, for example, maybe you'll take like AP Bio or like AP Chem and then do well on like the math side of things on the SAT, or you know, definitely stand out in the section that you plan to continue your studies in.
I also saw some people asking about like, oh, what if my school doesn't have like a GPA ranking system and like I don't have access to AP classes? So when they like are looking at your application, they are looking at it relative like to the opportunities that you had. So it's just like, you know, if you went to a school that like didn't have AP classes, that's not something that's going to necessarily be counted against you, as long as you show that you were trying your hardest. And then in terms of extracurriculars, like I saw someone ask a question about like how to get a #1 ranking. Like Hannah said, like there's no way to like there isn't any like specific extracurricular you need to be doing. They're just sort of looking for you to be more dedicated to it. So like don't join a bunch of clubs your junior year and then like suddenly try to use all those on your application. Rather it should be things that you've been like consistently a part of since the beginning and just like have shown that you're passionate about.
That because like honestly, I was much happier when I just did things that I liked in high school, and it showed, because if you like what you're doing, then you'll want to do it more, and if you do it more, then you'll end up doing much with like your interest. Like I think a lot about my application and why it worked for me is because I just took things that I liked and I ran with it. So I just went as far as I could in something that I genuinely enjoyed doing, and that looks good because when you're writing your essays, it's very, very easy to tell if someone is passionate about whatever they're liking versus if they only did it to like, you know, look a certain way. So yeah. Well, so
I also, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Really, really quick. I also just want to say that like there are definitely different types of applicants, and that like some people are going to be admitted because their academics are like through the roof, and some people are going to be admitted because they were really instrumental in their community, or they built a movement, or they created some kind of like, you know, innovative new product or concept, or like or have like a really inspiring story. Like people are admitted for a variety of different reasons, and not all of them involve having, you know, stellar or perfect like academic records. And I know a lot of people who got below average on the SAT but are here because they did something really remarkable in their hometown or like around the country. And so don't be afraid if you don't think that your grades are like meeting the hypothetical like Harvard standard just because Harvard doesn't have one. They like apply their every credential on like a case by case basis. And so if your like holistic narrative is something that they're looking for, and obviously to an extent it's also a little bit random, so you might end up getting a perfect SAT score, perfect ACT score, like 100 in every class, but still not get admitted just because they're looking for a not just like they're not just looking for like a list of numbers, they're looking for a human who's going to enrich the campus. And so like don't doubt yourself, but also know that like there's also a degree of kind of like crazy probability to it, and you don't never know what's actually going to happen. And so yeah, keep your options open, and don't let it feel like a reflection on your quality as a candidate, because it's not.
I also wanted to add, somebody asked about like the fixed classes thing, and I think they are an international student, so Haile also responded to them. But just to talk about like how Harvard looks at your application, they make sure to like take into consideration the resources and like the county you're coming from. So I personally went to kind of like a really wealthy county in my state, but my school, like my school within the county was not like wealthy at all. It was actually it was majority minority, and it was really low income. So during my interview, I made sure to highlight that because I knew they were going to be looking at it in the sense that like my county has this much funding. My county is like one of the best in Maryland, but that my specific school didn't really have access to those resources as much. And I feel like I highlighted that in my interview well, and the alumni interviewer was able to communicate that to the admissions officer, who were able to like look at my application in a different lens.
You can also include some of that information in your written application. Like there is a place for like extenuating circumstances in the common application. And so you can write out like whatever concerns that you have, all the things that you guys are inputting in the chat, like can be written out and explained to the admissions officer in that section. So there's always going to be an opportunity to kind of explain your situation. So don't be scared about that either.
Okay. We have about 4 minutes left with time. I think there's like one question I feel like we could all kind of answer really quickly, then I'll go into like logistics about how to do this. So the last question I think we could do is, what is some advice throughout the application season that you'd give to your younger self and some of us applying to colleges? So if people want to answer in like a sentence or so, that'd be ideal. I know for me, I think the one thing I wish I knew was that I didn't have to apply to so many places, and that I knew that like things would work out. I'm sure everyone in this call is very smart, and they're like capable of going into a school like Harvard. And depending on how like the application process works out, don't let that be something that leaves a mark on like your confidence and your like your belief in yourself. So that's what I'd say.
I think
I think Shema touched on this before. I just encourage myself to apply to more schools that I was afraid to apply to because of like financial reasons, or like having this mindset of like, oh, they're looking for this kind of applicant and I don't meet that. Because at the end of the day, like when I applied to like Harvard and then I got in, it was like assigned to me, and trying to tell all of you today is that like schools are looking for different types of applicants and different types of people. So don't be discouraged from even just trying an application in the first place.
I think I would tell myself that there isn't like a formula, that you can't just like, select all the right inputs in your own story and make sure that you get in. I think I was trying to maximize all the variables in the formula. And I don't think that is possible. And so whatever, like I would say just like present your most, it sounds so cliche, but present yourself as you are in your application and not what you expect them to want. Because they're going to be able to tell if you are if you are behaving yourself in a way that's inauthentic, and they, like, at the end of the day, aren't looking for someone who checks off every box. They're looking for someone who is genuine and passionate and capable, and everyone in this room is all of those things, and so everyone is like able and qualified, and it's not a matter of trying to game the system and figure out what exactly they want, because they don't even know, quite frankly. So yeah.
Okay, we have about a minute left, so I'll just go over like logistics after how this call will end. Yeah, so I saved the chat because there's a lot of questions that are being asked. And I think that one thing that we'll do in the email afterwards is that since I've saved the chat, we'll respond to a lot of the questions that haven't necessarily been answered, questions that aren't redundant as well. So we'll make sure out in like the email. In addition, like we said at the beginning, we're setting up a Calendly link so that people receive asynchronous essay help, because there's a lot of interest received by people. So yeah, I hope that this call was helpful for everyone. So we're sorry that it had to like end just due to this Zoom recording thing. But like we said, there's a lot of people here who are willing to help. We've dropped our Harvard ESA email in here again. I don't know if this is going to cut out in any second, but here's the Harvard ESA email. This is my email if anyone wanted to
Follow us on
directly
Instagram too.
follow Harvard ESA. But yeah, we'll be sending out a Calendly link in this email. And yeah, we appreciate y'all.
Thank you so much for joining.